All right, now we're on recording. Okay, we have already started. We'll go back to screen share. We are talking about Psalm 109, and we're amazed at just how something like Psalm 109 could be in the Bible with all the cursing and the anger. So we're talking about David, how David was a king and a hero, a tragic hero, but a hero all the same. And he's called a man after God's own heart. So we know David, but who is this enemy that he's so angry at? We have a couple of clues. It could possibly be Saul, King Saul, that was his major enemy early on in his life. Could possibly be his own son, Absalom. You may remember there's a story, a number of chapters in 2 Samuel where Absalom turns against David and tries to kill him, leads an army against David, kicks him out of Jerusalem. David has to flee. Eventually, there's a battle between David's forces and Absalom's. David wins and reconquers the kingdom. But these are the two major enemies that we have names for in David's life. There were others, of course. There were rival kings in neighboring countries and who knows what else. But these are the ones we know by name that we sort of naturally might think would inspire him to be this upset. But the problem is, this psalm doesn't really describe these guys. It doesn't really describe the situation between David and Saul. It doesn't really describe the situation between David and Absalom. The problem in this psalm is not that someone has kicked David out of his home or away from all that he loves and cares for. That's not the problem. And the problem is not that someone has rebelled against his authority and is trying to take the kingdom away from him. That's not the problem either. We have to look a little closer at the psalm to see exactly what is the problem that's causing this. And what we do is we find out there's a they and there's a he. There's certain times when he talks about his adversary in the singular, and there are times when he talks about the adversary in the plural. And when he talks about the adversary in the singular, he says this is someone who is wicked, right? Someone who himself is not a good guy, someone who's guilty in actuality, but is using the power of the court. We'll see the sort of courtroom drama of this psalm as we go on. He's someone who's deceitful. These are the characteristics that David is listing in this psalm. He's someone who has debts, creditors, people who could come and take away all that he has, right? Because that's one of the things David wants to happen. May a creditor come and take all that he has. We know that this guy has a wife and family because David asks for his wife to become a widow and his children to become fatherless. We know that this is someone who does not show mercy to others. He's someone who tends to be, he or she, I suppose it could be a woman, but I'm assuming it's a man as a rival. Someone who doesn't show mercy, someone who takes advantage of others' vulnerability, and someone who loves cursing and does it a lot. And for that to appear as a criticism in the psalm where David does a lot of cursing is quite ironic. But this other guy apparently is a pro, like just a pro at cursing. And when he says cursing here, he doesn't mean what we call cursing. We call, cuss words, vulgar language. We call those things cursing. But what David is talking about here is more like what he's actually doing in the psalm, trying to invoke a spiritual power to make evil things happen to somebody. We might think of it more in terms of like a witch casting a hex on someone or something like that, right? That's more what he's thinking of when he says cursing than just vulgar language. Now, some of our vulgar language actually comes down to cursing someone. Like if we say the word damn, it really means condemn them to hell, right? We're cursing the person to go to hell. Of course, God keeps that in his own power, and it's not something subject to our language, so it's really a useless curse in that sense. But so some of our curse words go back to that. Not all of them do. Some of them are just vulgarities. But I want you to see what David means by cursing, because it becomes central to this person's character. But then sometimes David talks about his adversaries in terms of they, the plural, right? So what are the things they do? They have framed a lying argument with hateful words without a cause. So they're arguing against David somehow. There are words flying back and forth. And if you've ever argued with somebody who is really good with words, you know how frustrating that can be. Or maybe you're the person who's good at words and it's easy to sort of come out ahead in an argument if it's all about words. That's the kind of thing David is faced with here. It's a battle of words. It's not a battle of soldiers, chariots, swords, spears, slings. All the things David is good at do not come into this at all, right? David's wheelhouse is battle, but this is a battle he is not prepared for. This is all about words, lying words, there's judgment going on here, so it's a courtroom kind of situation. We've got someone who's accusing. He multiple times calls this person an accuser, or even multiples accusers, people who corrupt good and turn it into evil. They're using David's name as a reproach. He's in the David party or whatever, right? They're using it as an insult. They see him and they shake their heads, which was an insulting sign in those days. These are people who don't naturally see God at work in the world. So they're kind of living their lives apart from God. And these people seem to curse a lot too. So there's just a lot of cursing going on in this whole scenario. So that gives us a little sense of what David's dealing with. He's not dealing with a battle. He's not dealing with a Goliath. He's not dealing with Saul. And he's not dealing with Absalom, who fought against him. He's dealing with words and accusations and judgment, right, and cursing. So that's what makes me think, as I look at this psalm, that what we're dealing with is a political or legal challenger. In these days, when the court sat to give judgment, there wasn't a courthouse. Right? What they would do is all the elders, the city elders, would gather at the gate of the city, because that's where people went in and out. That's where they had their marketplace. If there was going to be an argument, that's where it would be. Right? It would be an argument over money, or someone cheating at weighing out the grain or something like that. That's where the court needed to be held. So that's where the elders would gather every day. They just go sit in the city gate. And people who had a case against each other would come before the city elders and argue their cases. And I'm getting the sense, as we look at this, that that's kind of what David is dealing with. Maybe he's been sued, essentially, or brought to court in public, right? And it's a legal challenge, but it might also be a political challenge. We in America know all about this. Think about how many legal/political challenges we've seen in the last 20 years, right, against presidents from various parties, right? People absolutely use the courts as a weapon against, as a political weapon to destroy somebody. I think that's what's going on here. I think we've got someone trying to use the legal system to destroy David politically, and he knows what's at stake. And this guy seems to be someone who has a large family, and probably has a supportive faction, because the family gets mentioned in the psalm. And I imagine there's a sort of a faction behind this person. So if you look at the things that are described here, the way this enemy is described, this is the profile that you get. And that sort of hints at maybe what's going on. That's the problem with this psalm. So let's look at what David actually says here. Introduction to the facts and the feelings that are going on. It's interesting that the Latin title of this song is God of My Praise. When that's sort of tangential to the beginning of this psalm. This psalm spends so much more time talking about how terrible the bad guy is than it does talking about how great God is. Although it does do that at the beginning and again at the end. So it's not that's not important. Hold not your tongue, O God of my praise, for the mouth of the wicked, the mouth of the deceitful are opened against me. Look at all the words. This verse is chock full of words, which seems silly to say, but it's all about words. Hold not your tongue. Don't let your tongue be cut off. Don't be silent here, God, right? How can God be powerless? How could God have his tongue cut out? But that's kind of what he's feeling like. He's saying, don't be silent, God. Rise up, do something with words. Hold not your tongue, O God of my praise, for the mouth of the wicked, the mouth of the deceitful are opened against me. This could mean like the mouth of a lion devouring. I think he's really referring to here, again, the battle of words. And he calls this person the mouth of the wicked, the guilty person. And the word actually means someone who misuses the legal system. And then the second, the mouth of the deceitful, the frauds, the cheats, the economic cheats. We would call it maybe the rich person who oppresses the poor, right? That's who this person is. And of course, this is, again, a sort of a familiar situation to us. We can very easily imagine a rich person going to court and having all the right lawyers and being able to get off scot-free, right, on some technicality. Someone who's defrauded and cheated people and is guilty and yet still has a chance to be seen as innocent. And so David is saying, don't let this happen. Don't let this happen to me, and don't let this happen just for the sake of justice, right? The bad guy here is loud and proud. Is God going to do anything about it? That's the question. David goes on. They, here it's back to the plural. He's gone from singular to plural for the enemy. They speak to me with a lying tongue. They encompass me with hateful words. Here again, it's words. And fight against me without a cause. The word speak in the beginning there is to set things in order, in a very ordered, logical argument, right? To command something, to make an order of words. So again, we're looking here at something very much like a legal opening or closing argument. And words and ideas set in order that end up coming out to be a lie, but that sound very plausible. And David's saying, they don't have a cause to fight against me. I didn't do anything to them. Despite my love, they accuse me. I was good to them, he's saying. And here they are attacking me. And the word accuse is where we get our word Satan. When the word Satan means adversary or accuser, sometimes it's considered to be like a prosecuting attorney, someone whose job it is to accuse you and force you to defend yourself, that kind of thing. We'll see this word show up again here in a little bit. Despite my love, they accuse me, but as for me, I pray. I pray for them. I make, the word in there means to roll out flat or to make level. I take them and put them on a level with me. I don't hold myself up here and them down here. I pray for them despite my love. And they repay evil for my good. This means to make something become. So this means they make the good become evil. They're corrupting things that are good and they're turning it around and turning it into hatred. Right? So David is trying to say here that he's done what is right in regards to these people. And yet it seems constantly to be coming back against him. So again, this does not describe King Saul, I think, or because Saul would not be a plural. And Saul never made a legal challenge to David. And it doesn't describe Absalom, because Absalom never did that either. He just flat out rebelled and brought an army. So I think we're looking at an unknown adversary, someone who doesn't show up in the stories of David. And when he says Satan, this is what he's thinking about. The other guy's lawyer. If any of you have ever been in court and listened to the other guy's lawyers spin things, right, you know what this feels like. They corrupt good and turn it into evil with words that are in perfect order and yet are perfect lies.
Well, I keep my horns hidden when I'm not in court.
Present company accepted, of course, Richard. That's why I didn't say all lawyers, right? Just the other guy's lawyer. So I really do think that we are looking here at a forensic courtroom drama, right? He's sitting in the gate with the elders. It's a public thing. He can't use the army here. He's out of his element. This is not the sort of thing you just put stones in a sling and let one fly to fix. This is not the sort of thing where you lead men into battle and that solves the problem. He can't do that here. He's vulnerable. He feels very vulnerable to these challenges, these pressures, and he kind of has to wait on the system to work. David is very passive in this psalm. Despite all his desires for the cursing, look at how it describes his actions. He's not doing anything. He just has to wait. And he hopes that God will do something for him, but he can't do anything himself. It's almost like he feels hemmed in, and he has to depend upon God. And yet he knows what's at stake: his family honor, his personal honor. He could maybe be ruined financially, maybe the very throne itself. And of course, if David's not on the throne, then we don't get the line of David, then we don't get the promise of the Messiah that came through David. So the very promise of God for salvation. And David knows this, that God's own promise to him is at stake in this legal challenge. So I think when we look at this, we're very much looking at a Game of Thrones. I don't know if any of you are fans of the series. I haven't watched any of it really, but I think this is a cool picture. We're looking at a Game of Thrones here. This is a rival challenger. There are political implications. There are legal implications. David could fall, and he can't do the thing he normally does to solve that problem, which is lead the army into battle. So he has to trust.
Of course, the picture you chose is the guy who was the good guy who fell in the first season.
I did read the books, and it got hard to keep up with all the different characters after a while. I don't know if the TV series did the same thing, but I think Sean Bean is a great actor. That's neither here nor there. All right, so now we get into the curses, the fun part. Right? And the thing you have to remember when you look at the curses, step aside for just a second, we have to remember that this psalm is not history. Right? This is not David giving a whole list of the ways that he got vengeance on somebody. This is not a whole list of things that David has done to the person who hated him. This is wishful thinking. May God do these things to this person, right? So this is all about what God is doing, not what David is doing. This is not history. This is an self-expression of emotion, right? And it's not a pretext for action. David is not using his aggrieved status as a pretext for doing something in his own favor. He is not jumping into the army, into the chariot and leading the army to kill this guy. Whoever it is, he's saying we're going to have to let it work out in the courts the way it's supposed to. Right? He's not actually hurting this person. David's action here is passive. And he's putting action in the hands of God. He is sort of suggesting maybe a few particulars that the Lord might want to address, but he's not doing it. David is not doing it himself. He's putting all of this action in the hands of God to do, which means also he's putting it in the hands of God to refuse to do, if God so chooses. And then again, in the jurisprudence of the time, even the collateral damage to the family here would be moderate compared to what other courts were doing in the ancient world, probably even in Israel. Some of the punishments that were meted out were severe in the extreme compared to what we do today. So what we're not seeing here is any actual thing that happened or anything that David is doing. We're not even sure if God did this thing, what he asks him to do. All right. What we're looking at is completely hypothetical when it comes to these curses. Maybe God does it, maybe he doesn't, but that's in God's hands. And that's where David is putting it, which is not bad advice when you find yourself besieged by somebody who wants to bring you down. Right? It's not bad advice to put it in God's hands and let it be there. So these curses, I think, can at least show us that much. So here are the curses. Set a wicked man against him. He's a wicked man. The adversary here is a wicked man, and David's asking for a wicked person to attack the wicked person. This is sort of a natural consequence. This is going to be a theme that shows up a lot in these curses. David is asking for the natural consequence of this guy's own choices to come back on his head. He's not asking for bad things to be done to good people. He's not even asking for bad things to be done to bad people. He's sort of asking for the natural consequences of this to be done. So set a wicked man against him and let an accuser, there's the word Satan again. Let a Satan stand at his right hand. There's the other guy's attorney, right? David is asking for the same situation that he's experiencing to be flipped over so that his opponent experiences that situation. David has a wicked man attacking him. David says, well, let's let this guy stand in my shoes and see how he feels, right? Let an accuser stand at his right hand the way I've got an accuser standing at my right hand. When he's judged, David says, let him be found guilty. Let his appeal be in vain. David is not asking for a lie to be told. He's asking for the truth to win out. When he is judged, let the truth come out, because this guy actually is guilty. He actually has done wicked things. Let it come out and not be hidden behind this veil of secrecy. Let the truth come out, David is saying. He's not asking for lies. Let his days be few and let another take his office. The idea here is like a term limit, or limiting the damage that this guy can do to the legal system, to the political system, like saying, let's not do another term of this, right? Let's cut this off quick. God, please don't let it go on and get worse and worse. What he's done already is enough. Let's please cut it off. He goes on, let his children be fatherless, waifs or wanderers is the word. Let his wife become a widow. Let his children be waifs and beggars. Let them be driven from the ruins of their homes. This could also be translated, driven to the ruins as their homes. And for us, this brings up a problem that it didn't bring up to the ancient world. For us, it brings up the problem of collateral damage. We are very much a society where every individual person is responsible for themselves and only themselves when it comes to the law. You cannot punish someone's wife and family just because they were found guilty, right? They didn't have that value in the ancient world. This is a relatively new thing in human history. Here, you can be guilty by association. And so that's what David is connecting to here, because not only are you associated with the wrongdoer, but you might be sympathetic to what the wrongdoer did, and you might do the same thing yourself, or you might have been taught or trained how to do those things. You might think in the same way, right? So in the ancient world, this was not considered to be an injustice, guilt by association. It is considered to be an injustice by us because of each individual person being responsible for him or herself. All right, we continue cursing. Here we go. Let the creditor seize everything he has, and strangers plunder his gains. Here this is where we learn that this guy has creditors, that this guy is a money lender, or at least a money borrower, right? And that this actually has put the enemy, David's adversary, in a place of vulnerability. David is showing that he knows something of this guy's financial practices and his vulnerabilities. And he's asking the sort of natural consequence of debt to catch up to this guy. Because the natural consequence of debt is you have to pay it back, and you have to pay it back with interest, and it becomes ruinous. And also a creditor here would be a foreigner, because the Israelites were not allowed to lend to each other with interest. But for strangers to plunder his gains means they're taking interest. So these are foreigners from whom this man has taken money. Oh, sorry, everybody there?
Froze for a second.
Yeah, just
Here.
the meeting crashed on me for a minute there. I'm not sure what that's all about. We're still recording though. All right. Well, we'll go back to screen sharing. Okay, this needs to be full screen. So I won't go through all of this because there's a lot of text here. Here's where we find out that he has descendants, multiple generations of descendants. He's got some honor in this society that could be taken from him. David is asking for these things to be done. He's showing that this guy comes from a family that has been twisted or perverted or wicked for a long time. That even his mother's sins, the word there means to miss the mark. And he's asking for these things to be cemented in God's memory. Now, we know God, that Christ died for the whole world and that he can take all sins upon his shoulders and forgive them. But God also says several times in the scripture that he visits the sins of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation, especially to those who do not love him, right? So this asking God to remember their sins is not entirely outside of the bounds of the way God has already revealed himself in the scripture. So we've still got a lot of collateral damage here. We've still got a pretty shocking list of curses. And there's not really a way to, this is what C.S. Lewis struggles with. There's not really a way to justify them per se. But I think when you look at them closely, you see it's not just like mindless anger. He's actually, in each one of these verses, picking out something that this guy has already done, some reason that he has to, some vulnerability, I suppose, that should be coming back on his own head, other than, of course, the children and widow part. Again, not trying to defend it, just saying it has to be looked at closely. Fine print, right, Richard? Like,
Right.
So I think this is what we're supposed to be imagining, right? Anybody a big fan of Perry Mason way back when? Hamilton Berger was actually a decent fellow when it got down to it, but most of the time he was the guy you love to hate because he was always the accuser, the adversary, the Satan, as it were, of the Perry Mason scenario. And what David is really asking for here is not so much the invention of new bad things, but rather for the evil that this person has put himself in the way of, that it would come back on his own head and be sort of the natural consequences of that. And it's monstrous enough, and with just even being that. But it's important to remember that it doesn't end there. It doesn't end with the curses. There's a why, and there are two moments in this psalm where the word because takes a vital role, and this is the first one. These are key moments in this psalm. Why should all these bad things happen to this guy? Because he did not remember to show mercy, but persecuted the poor and needy and sought to kill the brokenhearted. Right? David is not asking these curses for an innocent person, but for someone who's actually done some pretty significant evil things. But David is the target here. He calls himself poor. He calls himself needy. David was not poor and needy by our standards at all. He was the king. But these words in Hebrew don't just mean economically poor. They mean anybody who's suffering any affliction, any measure of vulnerability. And we even know from our society that just being rich doesn't mean you're not vulnerable. In some ways, it means you're more vulnerable because you have a lot more to lose in some ways, right? Jesus even says this too when he says, where your treasure is, there will your heart be, right? Because you've always got to be thinking about how to take care of it and how to keep it going, and where, the market's up and market's down. and that the poor people are free from those burdens. Blessed in spirit are the poor, he says. So David is not economically poor, but he is here, I think, afflicted. He says this guy, his opponent, has hunted down the sad soul. What a phrase. Because this man did not remember to show mercy, and he hunted down the sad soul. He took advantage of me when I was miserable and sad, when I was depressed. He took advantage of that, right? So I think this gives us a little hint at maybe when David might have fit this description in his life. We'll jump back here to the timeline. We know David was king. The first half of David's reign, everything's great. David's the golden boy. Everything's up and up. It's just onward and upward to the top. But right in the middle of David's reign, that's when he has the episode with Bathsheba, right? And where he commits adultery and he commits murder, among other things. And the rest of the David story is him wrestling with the consequences of that action. And it was very public. People knew about this, especially because the prophet Nathan came in and made sure everybody knew about it. So David then, after this, is constantly wrestling with the consequences of it. He's sort of sadder but wiser. And I think that that is when David is politically vulnerable. I think this psalm takes place between the Bathsheba incident and David's death. Maybe before Absalom, maybe after Absalom, I don't know. But David is clearly, even if you read the stories from 1st and 2nd Samuel, from the Kings and Chronicles, David is being criticized by people. He's vulnerable politically. He's making mistakes that he wouldn't have made before. He himself is sort of overcome by remorse for these things. And so he's constantly sort of apologizing to God in that last half of his reign. I think this is where this psalm should be located. I think it's a political and legal attack on David at the time when he's vulnerable. Not at the time when he's on the ascent, because that's when he's not vulnerable. That's just Father Thorpe's opinion, not the gospel truth. The song is all about the God of my praise. And this is why both at the beginning and the end, he mentions the God of my praise. Even though David is cursing this guy up and down, and he's got all these fascinatingly creative ideas for how to make him pay and hurt, still David has in mind all the time here what God is doing. He has God in mind because he constantly comes back to that. He may take a digression onto the curses, but he comes back. But you, O Lord, help me. Right? He knows that God will do mercy, that God remembers to do mercy. David himself is trying to remember to be merciful. This was the one thing that saved him in the Bathsheba incident. And there it is in 2 Samuel 12. When Nathan the prophet shows up and puts his finger in David's face and says, "You are the man," right? He told that little story about the land, the rich man that took the poor man's land and so on. He says, "You're the rich man, you're the man." David in that story didn't punish the hypothetical rich man like he should have. He gave that rich man mercy. And so God through Nathan gives David mercy also. And so David learns an important lesson, and I think the mercy of God is really in his mind, even though he's cursing this guy. Because this guy, what is the one major fault that we've seen? Curse him because he did not remember to do mercy. David's not even saying that this guy has, at this point, he's not saying he's got no case. He's saying he didn't remember to do mercy. He's being relentless. He's being merciless. And what's at stake here is the character of God's nation. There's the world's way, which is survival of the fittest, survival of the strongest and the most powerful, where the weak lose the cutthroat game of life. Whoever wins is the one who ought to win, right? This is social Darwinism. You just have to survive, right? This is kind of the way David's adversary wants to handle things. Not doing mercy, but just pressing hard when their advantage can be pressed. But David himself is trying to stand on the side of God's way, which is to do mercy. The world grows through birth, not through death. Right? The strong are supposed to protect and provide for the weak. David transgressed that in the whole Bathsheba thing, and he's learned his lesson now. Aged are supposed to be honored, and the sick healed. These are the ways that God's world works. This is God's way of dealing with the world. Who's right is who should win, not the other way around. And this is the way of the incarnation and the cross, mercy for us. And I think David is trying to create a world in which people have mercy on each other. And this other guy is not. This other guy is a relentless, fearsome competitor in the court case. David says he loved cursing. He took no delight in blessing. All these things, these are behaviors that this other guy has chosen. Right? He loves cursing. God loves to bless. God delights to bless, but this guy wants to curse. Right? Not so much blessing, more cursing. And these are chosen behaviors. This guy has chosen to live this way. Therefore, let the recompense, or rather the natural consequences, that's the literal sense of this word. Let the natural consequences to my accusers come back upon them. And then we're back to David. We get David's sob story comes back, right? But you, O Lord my God, deal with me according to your tender mercies. I am poor and needy. My heart is wounded. He knows that this is how God likes to deal with the weak and the poor and the afflicted, right? God's very nature. He says, according to your name, according to your nature, deal with me. This is the way God works. He has mercy on those who are weak and those who are poor. David's trying to take that position. An unusual thing for someone who's used to being the strong warrior leader. Now he's taking the position of weakness and need. Look at David's choice of defense in verse 23. He's not grabbing the sword and going at it with the army. He's not trying to destroy this man back economically or legally. David's defense is fasting and prayer. Another reason why I think this happens late in David's life, because he doesn't do that much of that early on. He does more of it later. And here we can see also his vulnerability, right? They're using his name as a reproach. And here he uses the word save. Save me for your mercy's sake. And the word save is the same word that we get Yeshua, the Hebrew word Yeshua, which means Jesus, the name Jesus. Jesus' very name appears several times in this psalm. Help me, O Lord my God. Jesus me. Save me for your mercy's sake. Let them know that this is your hand. He's concerned about God being known. He wants people to see that God is real and God is active and God will bring justice. They may curse, but you will bless. Who's actually in charge of the universe? This other guy wants to compel evil to happen, but God compels good to happen. Who's greater? God is greater. And David wants people to see that. Let those who rise up against me be put to shame, and your servant will rejoice. There's a lot of irony here. One side is being put to shame, and the other side is rejoicing. One side curses, the other side blesses. My accusers be clothed with disgrace, wrap themselves in their shame as a cloak. That means God wins the PR battle. David knows there's such a thing as public relations. He knows the importance as a leader of the people's will. And he's saying, let my accusers lose in the public eye. Let God be seen to be just by the whole people. I will give you forceful, strong. This is the same word we saw in Psalm 46. I will give you forceful praise with my mouth. He accused God earlier of having his tongue cut out. Right? Will God's mouth be silent? The mouth of the wicked is opened against me. Now we have a mouth coming back again. I will give thanks to God with my mouth in the midst of the multitude, publicly, because he stands at the right hand of the needy to save him from those who would condemn him. God is the defense attorney, in a sense, right? Stands at the right hand of the needy. Earlier, David said, at my right hand, there's an accuser, a Satan. Now he's saying God stands at the right hand of the needy. God is the defense attorney for the poor, the orphans, the widows. Right? And in the Greek, this word is paraclete, and it's the word that the New Testament uses to describe the Holy Spirit, the defense attorney, the one who's called alongside to help. So there's some New Testament resonance there. And again, the word Yasha, Jesus, to save his life from those who would condemn. And this is a good example of exactly what Jesus does. He comes to us when we are sinners, poor and needy in this regard, to save our lives from condemnation. So I think overall what we've got here is a psalm that's very much concerned with justice. But even after all the cursing, I think it's clear that David is more concerned even with mercy, because he knows that that's how God works, that God is concerned with mercy, even more than justice. And of course, in Christ, that's what we experience as well. We deserve all of these curses upon us. We deserve the natural consequences for our sin, and yet God has come and shown mercy upon us, died for us, risen again, given us the Holy Spirit so that we can live with him. All right, that was a mouthful. Thoughts or comments as we've looked at 109 here? Anything you want me to zoom back in on? Or
I was kind of thinking in reading this that the section is not necessarily another adversary, but the way he's beating himself up for what he has done. And, we tend to, be extreme when we're trying to beat ourselves up. And at the end, then he suddenly says, but you're merciful.
Yeah.
And he's remembering it, rather than there being another adversary, as opposed to, it could be somebody specific,
right.
or it could be a group of people specific. Right. But it also could be just him and the way he's looked at the things he's done in his life that turned bad.
That's very true. And
that's what I thought too.
He has got plenty of them to look back on. Right?
But we don't know if this is one of David's.
Well, the title says it is, but again, like we said last time, that may or may not be significant. It's been with this psalm for a long time, but doesn't mean it's true. It's hard to tell. But I think the point that you just brought up, that he's beating himself up and he knows the value of mercy, I think that points to a very Davidic point of view. And I think especially at the end of his life, that's where he is psychologically, that's where he is spiritually, is very much aware of his own need for mercy.
Were these psalms directed at people in general, or are they written usually from a personal point of view?
That is an interesting question, because this is the kind of thing I might expect to put in a journal that nobody else would read but me. But this is a psalm, and it's in the public psalm book, the temple song book of God's people to worship in Jerusalem with. So maybe it had a heck of a melody for them to want to keep it. But somehow it got set to music. Somehow they started singing this. Somehow they saw it as representative of themselves. And maybe teaching an important lesson of some kind. So I have to think it was public in some way, if it's in this collection. So even if it wasn't, I don't know if it was directed at a certain person at the time, But it certainly became public later in some way. Maybe it's like a rap song where they're constantly mentioning other rappers and insulting them in various ways, like a rap battle. You mess with David, he's going to write you into his next song, pal. Or like a bad breakup song from a pop artist or something like that.
I had the thought that it's a Psalm of David, but I wondered if maybe it was written by somebody who was bringing a case before David in court.
Oh, that's an idea. So the preposition of, even in English, has a huge range of meaning. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't actually exist in Hebrew. It's just sort of it's one of these languages where the nouns have cases. It's an inflected language. And so you're sort of guessing at which pronoun belongs there, or not pronoun, but which preposition. So it could be a song for David, a song of David, a song by David, a song with David. I mean, you've got that wide range. So it might have been.
Because David was the ultimate judge in his court, was the highest court of Israel.
That's right. It was the major function of a king was judicial. You notice that there's never a legislative assembly in the Old Testament. They don't have Congress. They don't have a legislature. There's no one except Moses who's famous as a lawgiver, because Moses, God gave the law through Moses, and that's it. So there's no more legislation to be done. So they don't need a government that does legislation. The executive power, the power to keep God's laws, was in the hands of everybody. It was a broad-based power, right, or responsibility. So they didn't need someone really with the executive function. What they really needed was someone with the judicial function of government and someone to lead the army, right? And that's what you see even when they make their first king, King Saul. They come to Samuel and say, we need someone to lead the army and to be a judge over us. So yeah, David, the judicial function was a huge part of what it meant to be king. And yet here David is accused in the court itself, unable himself to give judgment. That's an interesting idea, Richard. Maybe we've got someone whose professional expertise is fairness according to the law, like a professional judge. And suddenly he's the one who's accused. And he's bringing all that reflection to his feelings. In verse 30 here, we get the second use of the word because, right? The first one was about verse 15, halfway through, where it says, because he did not remember to do mercy. That's why he should be cursed. In verse 30, he wraps it up with, why give thanks to God, even in the midst of all this stuff? Because he stands at the right hand of the needy, because he does do mercy, right? Those two moments, I think, are really key for this psalm. It contrasts the way of God and the way that this other guy is taking. Any other thoughts or comments before we go? If not,
interesting presentation of the psalm.
Well, thank you. Fewer pictures in this one. I didn't have time to put more pictures in today, but we had a lot of verses. I've tried to keep some of these to shorter psalms because they're easier to get through, but this one was particularly long. So we had a lot to do, but thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.
Part of this.
Yeah. You have a good week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All,
see you on Sunday.
See you all on Sunday.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.